video and you hear my voice, please?
This is the presentation for the day 3 in the annual meeting in connection with the report we are doing to the IPCC members, which are part of our project, but they are working externally. The role of this process is that we are reporting to these 3 IPCC members, which were named in the proposal and accepted when this proposal was funded by the Commission. And then they are supposed to transfer this information to the IPCC entity. So this is the first report in the first 12 months. So I understand that in this first initial and first time that we meet, and in this session, they will have also 15 minutes presentation, each of them. It will be the first time they receive direct information from the different work package leaders and the coordinator. And then also we will receive the first report, 15 minutes, from their in different clusters. My idea is that in the second meeting next year in June, most probably 12 months later, we will have much more intensive things to report, because then most of the work package have already started. But next year, many of them will be finished, and then we will have much more information to report. So in this presentation, I will speak in these 15 minutes about what is this project and what is the role from the coordination point of view, a general overview of the project, and then you will have also presentations, detailed presentations for a specific work package, not all work package, because we have 12 work packages. This is a very large project with 31, 32, because one partner is an affiliated partner of the other one, 31, 32 partners, so it's a very big project. The most important information in this project is, as you see in the title, integration, mitigation, and adaptation strategies, with the collaboration of the core case studies, so participation to climate change risk. So this is an overview of this project. I would like to emphasize a little bit about the budget. The budget is just 7 million euros. We have a contribution from a UK partner. This is the contribution from the UK partner is funded directly by the UK government. But the project, of course, was approved by the Commission, and then when it was approved, then we had to make these separations. But in practice, the 31 partners, of course, are working on the research part commonly with the others. So this is just about the budget. The period of time we have is 42 months. The project will end on November 2025. We have started just 1 year ago, 1st of June 2022. The topic of this project is better understanding of the interactions between climate change impacts and risk mitigation and adaptation options. This is the call from the Commission. We have 5 core case studies. This is very important because they are really partners. They have a substantial budget for each partner. One is Guimarães. This is the most small local core case study in Portugal, about 100,000 people. Then we have the Hanse University in the Netherlands, UAS. They have an official signature and representation from the Netherlands Northern Water Authority. So they speak as core case, as policymakers, because all these people is policymakers. So they speak as policymakers. Turin in Italy, it represents the metropolitan area. This is a very large area, about 100 kilometers, square kilometers. Well, not square kilometers, 100 kilometers times 100 kilometers. So it will be 10,000 square kilometers anyway. Very important court case study. They substitute to the city of Lviv in Ukraine. Because of the Ukraine war, and then initially Lviv was going to be the court case study, and Turin was going to be a follower. They changed. Okay, we have also the Austria government. In this case, Austria government, of course, represent all the country. It is represented by the government itself, and they have also the affiliated partner, the Austria Technology Company. And finally, a very special court case study, which is Europe. Europe is the European Federation for Agricultural and Forest. The headquarters are in France. The representative in this project on relation to agriculture, also the cattle, and trees, etc. It's a professor in the University of Extremadura, and he's managing all this, let's say, court case study. Of course, this professor and the Europe is not really a policymaker in practice, but they are trying to act as they were. It's the only court case study also which involves two countries, because they are focusing on a special area, which is the Dehesa in the Spain, and also in Montado area in Extremadura in Portugal. This is just a special case study, of course, although the European Federation, of course, covers all Europe. We have these followers, as you see there, from Hungary, Ukraine, Slovenia, Poland. Valencia in Spain is represented by this company, VCE, and finally the city of Alcorcón, about 200,000 people, which is, let's say, a satellite city of Madrid downtown area, Madrid city. Okay, DISTENDER will develop a methodological framework to bring together adaptation and mitigation strategies against the risk of climate change to enable their creation through. So, in other words, the project meets to have together experts on social science, on co-creation procedures, on participatory process, and also experts in computer science, physics, methodology, and supercomputer, and we will go into detail in both areas. We have different workshops to extract information from stakeholders which have been selected by the court case studies. These workshops are now ongoing, and at the end of this month in June, there will be the last one in Guimarães. But we have already run the other four, two of them in May and two of them now in June. And finally, the last one will be the last week of June in Guimarães. So this is very interesting, because with these workshops, in the actual stage of the project, the Work Package 3 leader, Casper, from the Wageningen University in the Netherlands, he will produce information to be used as input for the Work Package 5 models, physical models, mathematical models. The input basically is we have, as I will show later, we have a round one in the actual work plan. The round one is now currently running. All the models are running the actual court case study city. So in technical terms, they will use the GIS data, how the city, the region, and the Austria country, for instance, are today with the GIS data, vector and shapes and raster files. So, but they will use the climate until 2050, produced under different scenarios. In the old times, they were the RCP, and now is in the SSP, SSP 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. We selected only four of them for computer limitations, but also for reasonable, rational reasons, because you know that these 5 scenarios, not all of them, because some of them, for instance, the scenario number 4 is mixed between the 1, 2, 3, and 5. So all these details have been taken into account. And there will be a presentation later about the more technical details from the experts in our project. So here you see a number of points that we will attack in this project. So the call is saying these details, and then we answer with the right part. I would like to emphasize the nonlinear impacts and biophysical models for multiple sectors, methodological framework for integration, adaptation, and mitigation strategies. So we will produce somehow a methodology which will be used after the project by many cities, regions at different scales. The unique contribution of this project is we are focusing on very local. I mean, the most local case is Guimaraes, of course, but with this 5 core case study, we try to provide a common methodology covering all Europe. Of course, the smallest is the core case study or the study for the future, for the potential future customers. The more, the more difficult is to carry out, but I think that our contribution will be very substantial. In terms of strategies, we have a vulnerability and risk assessment methodological multi-scale approach. Well, the answer for these parts is also important for DISTENDER. Methodology to develop local climate and socioeconomic scenarios, stakeholder engagement, co-development strategies, and networking activities. Well, this is just how to explain the adaptation actions and the mitigations. You know all of these definitions, and then we try to combine all of them with different sets of stakeholders and actors which are involved in each domain with limited intercommunication. Again, in order to integrate these 2 strategies, adaptation and mitigation, we have to achieve a synergic and integrated climate action, which requires an effective link in mitigation, adaptation, and realizing a framework for identifying and assessing synergies and trade-offs. Very important. This is one thing which is also mentioned in the proposal, in the call, sorry. Also in the proposal, of course. So if we define adaptation with an A and mitigation with M, this is a very typical scheme that you see that when we go to nature-based solutions, water management, and building insulation, we're in the right track, covering all of these scales, something which should be valid for very local case studies to larger areas, regional or large regional areas, countries in Europe. Okay, again, we are looking for DISTENDER solution in order to assess the trade-offs and synergies by using modeling tools. So we will maximize the synergies and minimize trade-offs through joint objectives. The scenarios planning, we have different exploratory scenarios to examine a range of possible future scenarios. And this will be extracted on these scenarios by the contribution from different actors. The models in one side, and the stakeholders and the new, the round 2 for the future of the case study or the local area we are talking about. Okay, this is the final objectives. We will create robust adaptation and mitigation actions and policies. And finally, at the end of the project, we will go to the decision support system in order to extract a prioritization, an order of prioritization, depending on the different political answers as input to the DSS. When we have all the robust strategies at the end of the project, then it will be a way to put it into the decision support system. This is just a map of all the case studies covered all Europe. This is the downscaling process. Some details about the case studies and sectors. And finally, in the implementation, we cover all the work packages as you see here. This is just a slide with a time schedule for that, for the different years. Our DISTENDER team has people, experts on all of these areas, Earth observation, economics, urban thermal environment, etc. And this is just a list of all the partners, coordinator in yellow, the green partners are the leaders of the work packages. Finally, the core case studies are in blue, and then the follows are the rest of the partners here. Thank you very much for your attention.
Okay, now we are a little bit late, but it's okay. So the next presentation will be shared between Casper and Barbara. Both are the leaders of the Work Package 3 and Work Package 2. So, Barbara, are you there? Can you hear us, Barbara?
Yes, I can hear you.
So please start your 7 minutes, more or less, presentation, please.
Yes, I just know where to share. I don't have the it doesn't allow me. So
you don't know how to share your presentation?
No, because there is no button here anymore.
Okay. We can show your presentation and you speak. Is it okay for you?
Yes, that's also fine.
Okay.
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 Yes, thank you very much, Roberto.
Okay, thank you.
So, good morning from Slovenia. My name is Barbara Goličnik-Marušić, and I come from the Urban Planning Institute of the Republic of Slovenia, which leads the Work Package 2 co-creation and stakeholder engagement. I will talk about this co-production of local core case study SSPs from Work Package 2 perspective. Could you please move on? You can just do 2 slides. The objective, just go to the next one. Thank you. Yes, the objective of this work package is to set up stakeholder engagement concept and co-creation framework and process. And we followed a highly engaging and core case studies oriented approach in relation to stakeholder mapping. It was based on the co-development of wish list stakeholders following the iterative steps of first criteria applying, extra, and approach. So further, we followed also the approach which was highly effective in co-creation framework development based on the reflection of relations between work packages, tasks, and deliverables aligned with work packages 2, 3, 6, 8, and 9, which you will know in detail later on. So the work package is composed of those 3 tasks: stakeholder identification and mapping, co-creation methods and activities, and evaluation of the engagement. So Roberto, please move on. Thank you. So the task 2.1 has been completed. It was about identifying, mapping, and analyzing stakeholders involved in decision-making related to climate adaptation and mitigation. It was about outlining the conceptual DISTENDER model for stakeholder identification and mapping, and of course about discussing typology of stakeholders needed for the work packages addressing participatory activities. The task 2.2 is ongoing. We have completed 4 of 5 workshops on socioeconomic scenarios. 2 more sets of workshops are foreseen in the future. And task 2.3 has not started yet. So we can move on. You can see in the next slide that our timeline was very busy this year, and we also produced 2 deliverables. One on stakeholder identification, mapping, and co-creation framework, and the other one is related to the workshops on socioeconomic scenarios and is report about that. Next one, please. So if we look at the main activities in this first year, we overview the participation and co-creation related content within the DISTENDER. And then we develop and apply the methodology for stakeholder identification and mapping. Then we communicate and synchronize with work packages 8 and 3 regarding participatory activities relevant for their operability. Then we develop and apply this co-creation framework encompassing 2 pillars, one on stakeholders' involvement, and the other one is overarching co-creation concept. Then we apply this co-creation framework in socioeconomic scenarios development workshops. We organize and run preparatory activities for the workshops and process the workshops on socioeconomic scenarios. In the next slides, there are highlights and challenges. Can you move, please? Yes, among highlights, I would emphasize approach to stakeholders from broad mapping to selection relevant for particular work package, and this overarching co-creation supporting a single methodology executed then in all core case studies in this year relevant for work package 3. So there were several challenges. I will mention 3. First of all, methodology of work setup. It was achieved on the basis of recognition of emerging relationships among work packages, iterative cross-work packages discussions, and then solutions forming. The second challenge we recognized was follow relations between work packages to trace and initiate the flow of cyclical co-creation. And this was achieved by early and in-depth study of application forum first, then map out the connections and propose cross-work packages collaboration using our overarching co-creation concept. The hardest challenge was implementation of workshops in different environments. We have live and online, within different core case studies, as Roberto already mentioned, from national, regional to local levels, and of course in different languages. So this was achieved with the help of the dynamic process approach with the DISTENDER virtual home we created. And I can't see my presentation anymore, I'm sorry. I just wanted to conclude in the next slide.
Yeah, Barbara, there was a problem with our microphone and they told us to mute.
I can't hear you right now. Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah, Barbara, I was saying
Yes.
that we were told from the company that there was some noise, background noise. So we activated again. So probably they did something in the central place. Can you see the screen now, please?
Yes, I can see the screen, but no presentation. So
you don't see your presentation.
Yes, I can see presentation now. It's my last. Yes, it's my last slide. So we will continue with completing the task 2.2. It will mean that we will do this last workshop in Gumarães, which is scheduled for end of June. And according to the DISTENDER co-creation framework, we will start the processes of outlining the contents for the purposes of work package 6. And of course, all the preparatory activities, cross-work packages, events, and process to final implementation, for final implementation of those workshops addressing adaptation and mitigation strategies, which is the topic of work package 6. We will also start with preliminary evaluation of these first sets of workshops to set up the monitoring system for the participatory events. But although the task starts in 2004, we will just start to collect information now and building the system. This was from Work Package 2. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Barbara.
We agreed with Kasper, he continues.
Okay, thank you, Barbara.
Thank you.
Thanks, Barbara. So my name is Kasper Kok. I'm the leader of Work Package 3, and we do this presentation together, as you will see from the slide, because there's loads of overlap between what Work Package 2 was doing and what Work Package 3 was doing. Overall objective of Work Package 3 is to develop the cross-scale socioeconomic scenarios, and later on also integrate those with climate scenarios. But mostly the approach is highly participatory, so most of what Work Package 3 did also included engaging with stakeholders and make sure they come to workshops. So there's quite some overlapping words there. We have 4 tasks. 3 of them are related to the development of the scenarios. 1 is on the integration with the climate scenarios. In a bit more detail, task 3.1 was to assess what scenarios already exist. Because we have more and more scenarios across the globe and also in all kinds of case studies, including all the case studies in DISTENDER. So we needed to make good use of what was already there, both at local level, but then we also looked at global SSPs, European SSPs, as scenarios are increasing all over the globe, and we mapped those onto each other. When we had a good feel for that, we started designing a methodology to how to develop scenarios. The very good thing was that we had a starting set of shared socioeconomic pathways for all the core case studies, so that became the common starting point. We designed a core method for all the workshops, and of course it needed to be flexible to some extent because case studies differ in size and they differ in language and they differ in culture, so that had to be done that way. And then we started developing the actual scenarios, and as Barbara already pointed out, the activities we're on now is actually to execute workshops in all 5 core case studies. So 2 of the tasks have been completed. There's a report on task 3.1. There's a deliverable 3.1 on task 3.2. Number is a bit confusing here and there. And of course, the actual code development of scenarios is ongoing. So activities were in line with all of those tasks. So we made an overview of all the existing SSPs. We developed the methodology for the scenarios themselves. We then also developed the methodology for model parameterization, which is one leg of Work Package 3. How does that all translate to model inputs? We synchronized with the needs for Work Package 6, which is not presenting today, but mentioned a lot, but it's, they actually do the robust pathways. And we need to have one common methodology to work towards that. We set up a program for the first series of workshops, and we helped in executing them. Highlights are actually, one is that land use change modeling was added to Work Package 3, so that was not in the original proposal, but it's a core translating mechanism between qualitative scenarios and quantitative models. We did find a set of existing scenarios, as I said, from all the core case studies, which was beyond our expectation. And we actually executed one single methodology. It was much less flexible. There was much less flexibility needed than we anticipated. So this is good for the consistency of the products. 2 challenges that we faced was, one was the short timeline. Within 1 year of the start of the project, we actually executed the full series of workshops. That's earlier than any other project I've been involved in. So we did start early, even before the start of the project. Roberto pushed us to have meetings, so that was part of the solution to make that all happen. And the other big challenge is to really satisfy those different purposes for the socioeconomic scenarios. On one hand, it's model inputs, on the other hand, is the context for vulnerability and pathway development. And well, yeah, that's been a continuous stretch for Work Package 3, but at least we have all the knowledge within the Work Package 3 core team available to make all those activities happen. And that's kind of going to continue in the next year. The first thing we really need to do is to develop all these different products. So we do narratives, we have to do model inputs, but also land use model outputs. And then importantly, prepare for the second series of workshops happening early next year, where the SSPs are going to be a core input in testing the robustness of pathways that will be developed. And so if I conclude, across Work Package 2 and 3, we can say the work's on schedule, which is an achievement in itself, given all the short deadlines. And that's partly because we really have a strong and effective communication across work package 2 and 3, but also 9 and also 6, and also with all the core case studies. So there's been a lot of communication, but it's been rather effective. And we have a successful execution of the scenario workshops. I think that all happened, and we're happy with the products overall after a first initial check of what came out of it. And the scenario products are really beyond what we originally envisioned only to be narratives, including land use model results, including visuals, and including a range of other products that will be developed over the next couple of months. And with that,
thank you very much, Casper, for keeping the time so good, because you spend a little bit less time than we expected. So next presentation is from Bodo, leader of the Work Package 4. Bodo, please.
Yeah, good morning, remote and in the room here. As Roberto mentioned, my name is Bodo Ahrens. I'm from the Goethe University Frankfurt, and I speak for Work Package 4, which is named Downscaling Climate Scenarios. And we have basically two goals. The first goal is to make the global climate projections of the CMAP6 ensemble useful for the impact models used in DISTENDER, the forest models, the health models, the air pollution models, and so on. They like to have kilometer scale hourly inputs. The global CMAP6 models have typically 100 kilometer grid distance, so we need to translate this down to impact model scale. The second goal is, as we heard before, we have localized SSPs available for the core case studies, and this allows us to do what-if climate scenarios with our tools. And I want to illustrate this a little bit more with the next slide. This is Vienna in summer 2003, a very hot year, as you might remember. The actual status is shown by these two figures or panels. The central part shows the soil ceiling, the blue Danube in blue, obviously. The city center with a lot of soil ceiling, and the Wienerwald around with not so much soil ceiling. And the climate simulation, the kilometer scale climate simulation done by Johann Züger et al. Shows this climate here shown by the number of tropical nights in 2003. If we do a what-if scenario, so if we reduce the soil ceiling quite a lot, we see in the simulation much less tropical nights. So reducing soil ceiling seems to be a good idea. This is a kind of what-if scenario we want to do with our climate model. Next question is, what downscaling technique do we apply for IPCC, for the last Working Group 1 report? We put together this slide in chapter 10, or this figure in chapter 10, illustrating the different methods available for downscaling the global climate models to the target resolution. You see here the high resolution regional climate models, the typical Codex-like climate models. We have higher resolution kilometer scale, convection permitting, dynamical simulations. And here we have statistical methods, which can be used in different combinations. In our project, we select two different methods. The first method is based on statistical downscaling, so we go down here directly from the high-resolution CMAP6 models, and this downscaling technique uses a method which is a combination of a perfect prognosis approach with a subsequent bias adjustment. The second method is based on kilometer-scale dynamical modeling, so convection permitting regional climate simulations, directly nested in the CMAP6 models, and we need some additional bias adjustment, especially for the hydrologists. They complain always that we underestimate or overestimate precipitation. So here's a precipitation example. This is the observation as given by EOPS for our historical period. White, no data, no data overseas and in Northern Africa, for example. In the center, the coarse grid climate simulation by EC Earth. Looks similar, coarser. It's a mean, temporal mean, but also a coarser spatial grid scale. And on the right, the kilometer scaled or the downscaled product with our kilometer scale model. By the way, we are using IPCC at GOOF. If you look closely, we see a bias already, but we can look on the difference plot. Here's the bias of the global climate simulation. Here's the reduced bias of our kilometer scale simulation. So we reduced the bias, but there is still quite some bias and we have to adjust for that. This bias adjustment has also to be done for the statistical approach chosen. And the impact on some skill score is shown with this figure already. Only statistical downscaling without the bias correction skill score close to 0, let's say. If bias adjustment is taken on a point scale or on a grid-based approach, the skill improves quite a lot. Yeah, another question perhaps is why we took two downscaling methods. We should keep in mind we have different target resolutions. 9 kilometer daily data as input for the impact models, 3 kilometer hourly, and even higher resolution, which depends on the impact domains shown in the upper right. We want to downscale 3 global climate models with different climate sensitivities to cover the climate sensitivity range. We want to downscale 4 different SSPs and additionally 4 localized SSPs for these global climate models. And we have quite long simulation periods. And with our kilometer scale model, dynamical model, we cannot cover the full time range from 1981 to 2050. We have to reduce our time periods a bit for the dynamical downscaling, so we need the statistical. And this brings us to the different advantages and disadvantages of statistical and dynamical downscaling. The pro is we cover Europe immediately. By the way, for the experts, it's the net cortex domain we cover. The dynamical downscaling method is physically consistent, but of course it's too expensive for very long periods and the 3 CMIP6 models. The statistical downscaling is much cheaper, still very expensive, but much cheaper than the dynamical model. It's empirically based. Some people like this. The question is if empirics is valid in the future. And the statistical downscaling approach is a bit limited with respect to what-if scenarios. We are more flexible with the dynamical model. For example, if we consider the soil sealing as shown in the example before. Another advantage of taking 2 methods is, of course, we have a mini ensemble and, as mentioned, complementary pros and cons. So as a summary, Work Package 4 delivers climate scenarios in extremely high resolution. The statistical downscaling is done already. It's produced for the users already 16 terabytes of output. Dynamical downscaling is ongoing. For both methods, we have to complete the bias correction. The investigation of fitness for purpose is ongoing. So sometimes the statistical output is better than the dynamical, vice versa, sometimes for other models. And we have to do, of course, the what-if scenarios we plan. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So, next presentation, it will be from Carl Schneider, from the University of Cologne. He is the leader of the Work Package 5, the largest, together with the One Package 11, the largest package in the project.
Yes.
All right. Hello, everybody. I would like now to make the link between the previous talk on the climate input through the impact models and economical models to risk assessment and mitigation. And this presentation is, as already said, three groups: Robert Dunford from the University, the UK Center of Ecology and Hydrology in Waterford, Nina Knittel, who is here in the room, University of Graz, and myself. This here is a brief outline of the story that I'm going to tell you now, and shows you the cycle in which we intend to work and are actually working. We will look at the different impact models, 6 in number, see how they then translate to economic assessment. This translates into a risk assessment and a vulnerability assessment, which will lead to pathways to adaptation and mitigation, which then can then be tested in the impact models again, and then continue that cycle a second time. And the prerequisite for that is that we run these models quite frequently. So all the impact models run often and for different case studies, for different SSP-RCP scenarios. So they must run fast. There must be a good balance between physical base of the model and robustness of the model. The general pathway to set up these models is shown here. Model calibration. This is why we need the bias correction, because we are comparing with a reality. So we calibrate for a period, then we validate, and then we run the scenarios. First round is that we use the current land use, that we do that on 5 case studies for a 30-year period with 12 scenarios, which derive from 4 different SSP-RCP combinations and 3 different climate models. In round 2, we will have a change in the input parameters by using a future land use and testing adaptation and mitigation strategies. The impact models are sectoral models. They are, in many cases, but in all cases, physical models, such as the air quality model, the urban heat island model, SWEPS, the water model is SWAT or MIC-G, and the yield model, the AFU model for forest, agriculture, and other land uses is yield safe. Other models are empirically based or statistically based, like the health impact and energy. All models are driven by meteorological input parameters from the different sources, which we just have heard, dynamical downscaling or statistical downscaling, but they also need station measurements for calibration, particularly that pertains to the hydrological models. Interaction and feedbacks between the different impact models are not considered. These are sectoral models. There's one exception. The exception is the direct link between air quality and health impact. That is really directly coupled. The spatial scales range typically from kilometer to sub-catchment scale. They depend on the model. The urban heat model has a higher resolution of 100 meters. Temporal scales typically range from daily to annual, again, depending on the model. I will very briefly give you just a glimpse on the idea of the models because we have very limited time. Air quality and health impact modeling are closely coupled, as I already said, and the air quality addresses emissions such as NOx, CO, CO2, SO2, and so forth. You see the list here. And produces air quality such as PM10, PM2.5, NO2, O3, And this then is used as an input to the health modeling, which is a statistical-based model. You see this here. And that produces then output, such as years of life lost or premature death, indicators of health. The urban heat model is the SWEFS, the Surface Urban Energy and Water Balance model. It is, as you can grasp from this graph, a physical-based model. There are all kinds of equations in it. It addresses different types of surfaces and then produces output such as heating and cooling degree days and many more parameters pertaining to the urban climate. The energy sector is represented by a regression-based model. This is sensitive to energy demand and adapted, of course, to the geographical scale of each case study. And you see here a general idea of how this works from the CURB tool, climate action and urban sustainability tool of the city level that translates then to the energy transition model. The hydrological model is the SWOT model, so a water balance model, or the MIG, which is raster-based. SWOT is on subcatchments and hydrological response unit, and that produces then information on floods and droughts. And finally, the AFLU model produces information on the reaction of plants on changed climates in terms of yield production, in terms of carbon assimilation, and that for all kinds of agricultural crops as well as trees. And these biophysical outputs now must be related into something meaningful for decision making in terms of mitigation and adaptation, and that is channeled through an economic assessment process. And the translation of the biophysical parameters into these economic parameters typically goes through indices. But we will have to discuss this more in detail to see what is the decisive parameter to translate biophysics into economics. And these sectoral economic assessments then produce the input into a computable general equilibrium model. And there you see again fluxes of payment which interact goods and factors from product markets, factor markets, pertaining to the entities of household, government, firms, and that then produces an output on a larger scale, economy-wide, on GDP, welfare, employment, distributional effects, and then we can check, is that favorable, less favorable, how do we adapt to avoid let's say, or reduce unwanted effects. And that approach pertains to case studies. And these case studies are driven then, the impact models, by the SSPs. And they address or they react on adaptation and mitigation measures. So now we have sort of the cycle, how we intend to go through the different DISTENDER rounds. And that then, that economic assessment will be used to assess risk. The assessment of risk and vulnerability follows the IPCC approach. The impact models provide data on hazards and exposure, because the hazards have a different spatial dimension and people are exposed differently in the area. But very importantly, while this here is strongly driven by the environmental parameters, the coping capacity, the capital availability, which define vulnerability, that is very much driven by socioeconomic processes and by preferences that requires workshops, that requires a socio-economic assessment. And the vulnerability is identified from the point where society has the least resources to cope with an impact of climate change. And in the standard, 4 different resources or capitals are used: human, social, manufacturing, and financial capital. How this then translate human capital in life expectancy, for instance, financial capital in household income is shown here, and that defines the coping capacity. And by combining the impact model output with the DISTENDER vulnerability assessment, maps of risk can be created. And considering both the level of impact of the hazard and the society's availability to cope with these impacts, then is used to identify or define pathways for adaptation. And here, the almost, that is the last slide, the adaptation and mitigation measures are identified through a co-creation process. And we have heard about this in this session already. And these measures and adaptation strategies are then assessed in round 2. So we run that cycle again. And here is the stakeholder process and the co-creation process that provides that input. This then leads to a vision that that template can be transferred and translated to other case studies. So the DISTENDER core cases produce input in terms of methodology and data, which can be used in the decision support system to show a template along which we can then provide knowledge transfer to other case studies. Thank you very much.
So, thank you, Carl. Keeping the time, now we are on the schedule again, so exactly 10 o'clock. So the next presentation is from the IPCC member, Working Group 1, Jan Gunnar Winter. Please identify yourself when you start your presentation. Jan. Yes.
Yeah, hello. You can hear me?
Yes, yes.
Thank you. I will now try to share my screen. Just 1 second. Can you see my screen now?
Okay.
Is it okay?
No, we don't see your screen.
I did share it. I got a message that it's shared, but apparently it is not activated. I'll try to stop it again.
Just a second. Yes.
So I open my share menu.
You have to share all the screen.
Yeah, that's what I'm doing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It worked before with Barbara.
What about now?
No.
Are you still screen sharing?
Yeah, I received a message that I'm sharing my screen.
Oh, okay, I think now we see you. Yes, okay. Yeah, because we were sharing also the screen. We are not familiar with this system anyway. I think now it's okay. Yeah.
But you can't see my screen.
Yes, physical science and climate change with
Oh, great. Okay.
background is a sea, it's an ocean picture, okay?
Yes, super. Okay, so first of all, good morning, everybody, and thank you so much for having the chance to contribute to this important meeting. And sorry for not being there physically and in presence, but I will now take some of the headlines from IPCC Working Group 1. I assume many of these things are familiar to you, but this is my attempt to wrap it all up and take the most important substance of the findings from that report. So first, just to set the scene, Very comprehensive process, of course. More than 4,000 scientific publications have been assessed. It's important to also say that IPCC as such does not do any research. It's just assessing others' work. An author team with more than 200 authors from 65 countries, and very important, 78,000 plus review comments, and this could be comments from individuals, from states, from institutions, that is handled by the panel. So it's a very, very comprehensive process. I will just show some of the headlines before I dive a little bit deeper. Recent changes in the climate are widespread, rapid, and intensifying, and unprecedented in thousands of years. So many words here that are actually quite important. The widespread, the rapidity, intensifying, I'll come back to that, with extreme weather events, and also unprecedented for thousands of years. There is another headliner concerning the 1.5 degree goal. Unless there are immediate, rapid and large-scale reductions in greenhouse gas emissions, limiting warming to 1.5 degree will be beyond reach. So this was said a few years ago, and we read in the newspapers these days that actually we may reach the 1.5 degree already this year, especially since we have an El Nino ongoing. But for sure, we are around 2 degrees C currently, maybe 1.25, and there is, of course, unevenly distributed around the world, and big cities already have passed the 1.5 degree. And most scientists don't think we are able to reach that goal. Actually, it could be hard even to reach the 2.0 degree ambition. And then it's a headliner about extreme climate events, heat waves, heavy rainfall, droughts, and frequent and severe episodes of these. And I will come back to that soon. So I think John Kerry said it very well. Actually, you don't need a PhD anymore to understand that things are going on. And here are some pictures just underpinning that: low-lying islands, droughts, heat waves, fires, sea ice diminishing in the Arctic Ocean, and less of snow many places around the world. So the signs are very visible, even though if you don't go into the statistics, and that's now what I will show you, data that is in scientific underpinning this. But first, we know that the greenhouse gas effect is mostly caused by greenhouse gases that absorb some of the long wave radiation that comes out from the surface and is trapped in the atmosphere, creating a greenhouse effect. What is the second and less pronounced and, let's say, understood effect is the albedo effect. So that's the surface ability to reflect solar radiation when it hits the ground. And that albedo effect is especially important in areas where you have white surfaces, like in the polar regions, but also in the desert. And here you just see an effect. If you have soot on top of a snow surface in spring, the melting is very much intensified. So this albedo effect is sometimes overlooked, but it's also part of the reason, in addition to the greenhouse gas effect, why we have such a warming. Now, this figure shows two, and if you keep to the left first, this is then a combination of reconstructed data. It could be from sediment cores or ice cores or tree rings and other paleoclimate. And in the last 150 years or so, we have observations. So we have measured temperature globally. And what we see here very easily is how the last 100 years or so is sticking out with a temperature and a climate that is unprecedented in the last, at least in the last 2000 years. Message 2 is on the right side figure. And that is why we can be so certain as climate scientists that we actually have an anthropogenic man-made warming, and that is by using advanced numerical models or global circulation models, the climate models. And the way this is done is that they take historical data, which we have observations from, and we run the models. And if they are doing a good job during the period where we have actually the real data to compare with, we have trust and faith in them, and then we let them project future climate. And these models have been, of course, improving since they were started to be used. And what we see in this figure is that around the late 70s, if we run the models with both the natural variability in the system and the greenhouse gas effect or the emissions, the models and reality is fairly close. If you take away the greenhouse gas emissions, the models fail in reconstructing what has happened. So it's quite clear from the models that we had a milestone period in the, let's say, around 1980, where the greenhouse gas effect, anthropogenic effect, became very influential. Here is the last 150 years where we have measurements, and as I already said, we are about 1.2 degrees now above the pre-industrial reference period. And hopefully this animation will work. Please give me an indication. Here we have blue colors being temperatures below the relatively, or the reference period here, 1950 to 1980, and red colors are above that reference period. What we can see now in the early 90s is that there is still a lot of variability. I tried to stop it during the war, the Second World War, and just show you how climate is also very effectful on different arenas, and maybe also change the war actually at that time. And then to my point about around 1980, we will see more red colors, mostly over land, more over land and ocean, more in the northern hemisphere at high latitudes, and also in the far south in Antarctica. And here is this just intensified year by year and running all the way up to today. So the next figure from the Working Group 1 report concerns the contributions from different greenhouse gases, but also other things like land use. And this is a busy figure. My point is that we have also human activity that cools the earth. For example, the nitrogen oxides and also the sulfurs are having a cooling effect. Also the land use due to the reflection change, the albedo that I mentioned. So if we didn't have also cooling effects from human activity, we would already have been at the 1.5 degree warming. So we can split it up in effects from carbon dioxide, from methane, from nitrous, and so on and so on. And this is then all presented in the report. And as Guterres has said many times, every tenth of a degree matters, and this might actually be a figure showing that. If you look at the bottom of this figure on the B panel, we see the change simulated by climate models for 1.5 degrees global warming, in the middle 2 degrees global warming, and to the right 4 degrees global warming. And we see here the very pronounced differences from relatively limited or small numbers, not relatively small, not in the climate context, between 1.5 and 2.0, for example. And as we heard already, there are many local details in this that this doesn't cover. So a few words about the extremes. We have in the past IPCC reports not been able actually to handle the extremes because there was a lack of data. An extreme is happening very rarely, which makes the statistical foundation for doing quantitative analysis very small and weak. So by nature, it's difficult to do quantification of extremes. But this report actually has a breakthrough on that topic. And this figure is showing that more or less all over the world, we see the kind of a North America, South America on the left side, and Europe, Asia, Africa on the right side of this figure. With few exceptions, we have had an extreme in observed hot extremes. So the panel goes further in investigating extremes, and this is very new compared to other reports. And if you then look at the 10-year event on the left panel and look at 1815 to 1900 as a reference period, so when a climate episode happened once every 10th year in the second half of the 1800s, at present with about 1 degree Celsius warming, that will happen 3 times in 10 years. And you see also for a 4 degrees world, it is almost 10 times, which means every year. Moving to the 50-year event on the right side, we see that is becoming even more pronounced. In the present situation, it's about 5 times more likely to have a 50-year climate event than it was in the 1850 to 1900 period. And if you go to a 4-degree world, it's almost 40 times as probably. And in the lower panel, it's also interesting because what I said now is the frequency and the numbers. But if you look at the intensity, you see also that the extreme heat is also intensified by many degrees here, depending on what global warming we have. So this is serious matters, and this is then all about hot temperature extremes over land, not oceans. Then back to a few figures, and I will be landing relatively soon. These are figures that we have seen in the last IPCC report, so they are updated. And on the right hand with the SSP 5./8.5 and 7, 4.5, and so on, that are emissions scenarios where a 8.5 scenario is business as usual, which means that we don't do much on actions to reduce emissions globally. The 1.9 is a negative emission scenario where we actually capture and store and take out the CO2 and other greenhouse gases. And the Paris Agreement is close to the 4.5. So if you manage to implement the Paris Agreement, you should look at the middle curve here in orange. And I must also say we are behind the Paris Agreement currently, unfortunately. So this is the projections, and if we keep to the Paris Agreement, we will see actually not 1.5, not 2, but more in the order of 2.5, 2.7 degrees warming by the end of this century. Totally different parameter. Arctic sea ice will melt. This is September, so that's the peak of the summer. And with a 4.5 scenario, we will go to what we could say practically ice-free summer month of September, sometimes in the second half of this century. But the good news here is that it is possible actually to build back the sea ice if you believe the models and look at the scenario or emission scenario 1.9. We know that CO2 is not only creating a greenhouse gas effect, it's also absorbed by the ocean and lowering the pH, so we get the more acid.
Yeah. 1 minute. You can.
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, and here, yeah, I'm almost done. And here we see the figures then for ocean acidification, which is a very important figure for the biomass and ecosystems at sea. And then finally, sea level change. Again, if we manage to deliver on the Paris Agreement, we will have around 70 centimeters of sea level rise by the end of this century. But if you let the models run further into the future, all the way to 2300, because of the slow response from ocean expansion, thermal expansion, also these ice sheets in Antarctica and Greenland, the sea level rise will continue. And this is quite disturbing figure, actually, where we show the first one I showed in the left, and then we will, depending on, again, emission scenarios, we will have sea level rises in the orders of many meters by 2300. And that was everything I had. So thank you so much. And I'm happy to be part of the conversation later also today.
Thank you very much. So, Piero, are you there? Are you hearing me, Piero? Hello? I think Piero, you have to click in the audio and video. Hello, Piero?
Can you hear me now?
Oh, yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Sorry. I didn't realize I had to select the options on the top of the screen.
We are not familiar with this software.
Yeah, no.
Thank you very much. Please start.
Then I think I have to share my screen, which is here. Share screen.
Yes, please.
Select the tab to share. Window.
Right.
Here we are. Getting close to that. Please be patient one extra moment. This shouldn't work, but now I should open my presentation. That should be fine. Is it okay?
No.
No?
Yes, yes.
You don't see my presentation full screen?
No.
No?
No, it doesn't work. We don't see your screen.
Share screen. Entire screen. Let's try that.
Now it's okay.
Okay, getting close to that.
Yes.
Is that better?
Yeah. Okay.
You should see now my presentation full screen. Is that the case?
Yes, please.
Okay. Thank you. Sorry for the for the delay and the time took me to get to the starting point. I will try to recover. So that's working group 2. I got involved in chapter 13 Europe and Gross-Starter paper 4, devoted to the Mediterranean region, talking very briefly about impacts, adaptation, and vulnerability with a focus on Europe. So, that's what you can find about Europe on Working Group 2. There is a devoted chapter to it. Then there are products in the interactive atlas and also some very nice graphics to summarize results of Working Group 2 in the Global to Regional Atlas. But moving directly to Europe, starting point is, of course, the change of the climate impact drivers. And here you can see a summary showing you the pattern of a change of precipitation, one-day precipitation, expected to increase over most of Europe and decrease over North Africa and southern shore of the Mediterranean as a consequence of anthropogenic climate change, of global warming. We have an increase of hot days, which will be lead to a particularly large number of days in Southern Europe, and a contrasting pattern of precipitation, which would increase over Central and Northern Europe, and little change or decrease in Southern Europe. That will lead to a change of climate over Europe. And here you can see it representing using the well-known Köppen climate types. There are some very interesting if you compare the present situation with the situation at the end of the century, something that is close to be a 4-degree global warming level. And you see that Mediterranean climate moves to part of Central Western Europe, part of Southern Europe becomes arid. The whole of Europe will be dominated by what is now the climate of the Po Valley of the Central Balkans. And continental and cold climates will tend to move out of Europe. The consequence is that many terrestrial biodiversity hotspots, as it is highlighted here, will be out in the future of what is their present natural niche. So with, of course, the risk of losing the corresponding ecosystems. And Working Group 2 identified a sequence of risks. Here it is the well-known burning amber representation of how risks depends on the warming level, and how confident scientific literature it is on the transition from the different level of risks, which, you know, for some risks, such a risk posed to the cultural heritage, it materialized the transition to high risk already for a very low warming level. Other very critical risks are related to water scarcity and in general to ecosystems and effect of heat waves on human health. So you see there are broad category risks posed to people and ecosystem from heat stress, losses of agricultural production due to combination of heat and drought, risk of water scarcity, which is particularly a problem of Southern Europe. Southern Europe is already characterized to some extent from water scarcity, and climate change is going to intensify this issue. And risks of flooding of different with different causes, with coastal flooding, storm surges, riverine flooding, and pluvial floods. Just making some example of relevant impacts with the target of showing how the global warming level matters. Okay, so here you have two different warming levels, 1.5 in the upper row, 3 degrees in the lower row, and here you concern plants, here insects, here mammals. And when you have the red colors, it means that plants, insects, or mammals will be, the majority of them will be outside of their natural condition. So of course they will get extincted or substantially changed in their functioning. And you see how much red you get, particularly for insects, with already a 3-degree warming level. So it is important to limit the warming. Same is true for other aspects of our environment. So actually, for alpine glaciers, the point it is where we are getting to a substantial reduction or a practically total disappearance of them. Here it is the evolution in time of our glaciers. Reduction of glacier is a problem everywhere in the world. Each of these boxes is a different region. For Central Alps, for Europe, the Central Europe, which means Alps, this is the observed ongoing reduction, and this is the future. So in a low emission scenario, we might save something that is about 1/3 of the present glaciers, but the glacier will completely disappear. Just a very tiny part of that will be left in a very high emission scenario. So scenario matters. Scenario matters also for urban settlements. Here, as a function of the number of hot days and the vulnerability of the urban texture, you have the transition from low risks in the low left corner to high risk in the upper right corner. And each of these dots represent a city. City green for Southern Europe, Western Central Europe brown, and black dots for Northern Europe. And you see that particularly for Southern Europe, going from a 2.5 to a 4.4 global warming level will imply many of them moving from the moderate risk area to the very high risk area. So also in this case, global warming level is a key point for the risk. Limits to adaptation. Of course, you know we can do a lot for adaptation. Here it is an example of a potential of adaptation for the production of cereals. Here you have maize and wheat. Generally, if you do nothing, consequence of crop production will be negative. But by improving irrigation or introducing new varieties, you can actually even change this disadvantage into a profit. But there is a price for that. Huge use of water for irrigation. And especially in Southern Europe, this is not given for granted that water is available. Actually, very likely it will not be available. Then ecosystem, particularly marine ecosystems. Of course, you can improve protection and management of ecosystems and marine resources. But here it is a graphic which shows very clearly the limit of adaptation. If you compare, this concern coral reefs, it's not for Europe, it is coral reefs worldwide, and you can compare what happens without adaptation and with adaptation. Each of those lines represents the evolution corresponding to a different warming level. So here, blue, pale blue, we have a low warming level, and without adaptation, even a moderate increase of temperature would lead to the disappearance of about 40% of corals. But with adaptation, you can really efficiently contrast that tendency and minimize the risk of disappearance of corals. But if a global warming level is high, it doesn't matter. Adaptation, you have all what you obtain with adaptation, it is to delay the total loss of the corals, but you don't have any chance to contrast it. A similar example is with forest fires. With forest fires, actually the hazard leading to forest fire has increased in the last 40 years, especially in Southern Europe, but also in Central Europe. So the danger is higher. But in spite of that, if you actually count the extension and intensity of forest fires, there has been no change. So it means that management and prevention, early warning systems, has been successful at contrasting this tendency in the drivers of forest fires. However, if you look the last years with a situation in which the fire danger has been very high, in that case, you have also an increase of forest fires. And of course, if you look in the future, that hazard level is expected to increase, and increase, if you compare colors here, at a level that depends on the emission scenario. So it shows that, the study shows that apparently the warming in the last few years has reached a value that reduced strongly the efficiency, the effectiveness of forest fires management. And that is for the future. So this altogether points to the basic message that contrasting the risks posed, well, it is for the Mediterranean Sea, sorry, it was cut and paste for the previous presentation, but it's true in general, so forget Mediterranean Sea. Contrasting the risks posed by climate change depends on urgent mitigation and adaptation actions. Mitigation to limit the magnitude of a change, adaptation to reduce the risks to reduce the risk by improving our reducing exposure and reducing vulnerability to climate change. Apologies for these cut and paste mistakes. So here is final summary. Impacts of climate change have become evident. Global warming poses serious risks in global and regional scales. The severity of risks increases with the level of global warming. Risks concern terrestrial and marine ecosystem, well-being and health of population, food production, cultural heritage. Of course, we can adapt, and there is a lot of potential in adaptation to manage and reduce risks. Effectiveness of adaptation is based on timeliness, reference to scientific knowledge, continuity of political commitment, implementation of adequate institutional structures, mobilization of resources, cooperation at multiple levels, inclusive procedures and decisions in collaboration with citizens, social partners, productive sectors, identification of feasible and effective options in the local context. So there is not one way to adaptation, but a variety of adaptation tools that have to be implemented depending on needs and local conditions. However, above 1.5 global warming level, residual risks are present despite the implementation of adaptation actions. Loss of habitats, ecosystem service, death due to heat waves, crop losses, water shortages, particularly in Southern Europe, reduction in general of available resources. So the bottom message is cutting emission is essential to enable effective adaptation. So, basic message, the losses and damages that we are starting to experience will continue in the future, especially affecting population and ecosystems that are most vulnerable. And acting now, urgency of action is essential for a sustainable and just world. And that was the final slide. Sorry for the initial delay. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much. So we move to the next presentation, which is climate change mitigation. It will be done by Maria Josefina Figueroa Meza, and she is part of the Working Group 3 in the IPCC. Maria?
But I am not finding where to. Can you see me?
Yeah, we hear you, we see you, and then please say your screen.
But I don't know where to share my screen. It doesn't. Okay, here it is. Open share menu and share screen. Wait.
Yeah, it's near the camera symbol. Near the camera symbol, you have.
Yeah. But it's opening everything that I have opened. DISTENDER.
You have to share all your screen. You see you see a microphone, a video camera.
No, I am this, but I just not finding my presentation directly
okay.
on the.
Okay.
So maybe I'll just go and put this, and then I'll go back here and try to share screen again. Sorry. if it highlighted. Select window. Very sorry.
No, no problem.
It makes not.
There is a symbol on the right of the.
Yeah. It's. That's the presentation deck. Nothing.
Do you need more time, because we can?
Yeah, we apologize for this. Let's see if this is the one. Yes. Allow. That's something that now I did.
Okay. Well, I see that you are using my link. Hope, because
It says
send you my link, because you appear as Roberto.
Yeah, no, I use your link, and yeah.
You can start. You can start.
Is it? Are you seeing my screen now?
Yes. It is clear. You can start whenever you like. Okay.
Oh, perfect. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for inviting me, and I would like to share some highlights from the what we did in the working group 3 on mitigation. And my format of presentation is a little bit different because I'm trying to get you up in the speed. I think I would not like to repeat lots of what has been said, but have basically 3 main messages. Will acting on climate change still make possible to keep warming below 1.5 degrees warming? What mitigation actions matter? What actors? What governance? And 3, what is the urgency of acting? In the urgency of acting should be attending a trade-off, synergies and justice. So in answering number 1, will acting on climate change still make possible to keep warming below 1.5? I just, of course, take note of all the growing evidence that we have been managing within the IPCC. This is probably going to make it easier with the IA in the future, but we have been doing this by hand, and it's an increasing amount of evidence and a number of reports. Among those, it was the report that in 2018 was explaining us why are we focusing in 1.5 degrees, the special report. And in that report we produced this collaboration with working group 2 on adaptation and working group 1 and the scenario working leading to this form of presentation, the amber figures that shows clearly what happened when we go from 1 degree warming to 1.5. And I'm not going to say more because the presentation before me on adaptation was clearly stating what we're facing. We are now heading more than 1 degree and then heading into the darker colors of the all the impacts that we just heard about. So main conclusion from the mitigation working group 3 is that of course we're not on track to limit warming to 1.5, and the key figure here, one key figure to look at is this 59 gigatons, and that is because of course when we look at the first of all, when we try to think about what is it that the goal is net zero, and I would like to emphasize that this is because we are focusing on keeping temperatures under 1.5 degrees, and that is there's an equivalence between net zero and 1.5 degrees, and therefore we have to, if we consider that by 2050 we're going to have achieved net zero, then we should make a lot of emphasis in understanding how can we achieve negative emissions and continue carbon neutrality on perpetuity. So these are very high stakes for humanity. And the 59 gigatons annually have to compare with what is the carbon budget, and a carbon budget that is remaining of 380 if we are filling a number of 59 gigatons per year, then we know that we have very little time to consume this carbon budget. And even though carbon budgets were not emphasized in the group 3 at this point, these are numbers that are remind us of what is the time frames of that we need to consider and how close we are to surpass the budgets that we have put for ourselves, the targets that we have set for ourselves. This is, of course, being experienced greatly today, as my predecessor presentation emphasized it clearly. And one of the interesting figures that was conveyed with the synthesis assessment was this, in which it is highlighting the extent to which current generations and later generations will be experiencing warming, and it's one of the most impactful figures, I think, because we should take into account that is, even if we're not feeling the impacts as greatly today, what is going to happen in the near future is really unimaginable. Okay. Now I am a bit stuck. Oh, sorry. The second question is, what actions matter, what actors, what governance? And this is something that the report was taking in different chapters. We know that there is the COP processes, the Conference of the Parties, that meet every year, and there's a difference between that and what the IPCC does. But it's a process building that's supposed to bring all the states and the governments into agreement about different issues. So it's based in trying to aim for creation of carbon markets, but it's basically a process is based on project-based climate finance, and is trying to reach agreements about how the finance of these projects can be attempted, and how the transfer of technological hardware can be also ensured. Recently, we had the one in Egypt, and unfortunately, there was not much discussion about the budget, the target of 1.5 degrees. And the things that were announced were mostly about finance for loss and damage, which still needs to be discussed in what form it will be advanced. But one of the small glimmers of hope in the discussion is that it's in the recordings of this meeting that was acknowledged that there is a right, it's an obligation, a human right, similar to human rights. There is a right to clean, healthy, and sustainable environment. And then we will see that there is some judicial processes going on in several countries trying to press the state into more action, and then this kind of language matters in the future, establishing this as a right. So from COP27 we didn't get too much hope about maintaining a 1.5 degree target, even though nobody has recognized it publicly. The Working Group 3 is trying to present mostly action in terms of systems change, and then has a focus on technology, finance, efficiency, co-benefits, and life change behavior. But it has a big role places a big role in innovation. Of course, there is a high degree of techno-optimism that things will be advancing fast in terms of technology, and technology will lead us into a future that is low carbon, even though it recognizes that there is no silver bullets, and then cities as hubs for innovation. Directly, the report emphasizes how, in some cases, for instance, the renewables have been, the price of renewables have been falling below those fossil fuels, and this is the case for photovoltaics, onshore wind, and batteries, and this gives a lot of hope in terms of this techno-optimistic view of how things could be unfolding. The report emphasizes that there has to be a transition in energy, and emphasizes electrification from almost all sectors. Even though widespread electrification and improved efficiency, but of course it highlights the use of other alternative fuels like hydrogen and sustainable biofuels. But the major transitions in the energy sectors have to occur within the coming future. And this report emphasizes it has an approach, a sectorial approach, looks into specifically into transport and what can happen, what can be the transition individually in each sector. For transport, then there is, of course, reduction of demand, low carbon technologies, electrification of transport. For sectors like aviation and shipping, there is still a big discussion, and the alternative fuels, these are harder to decarbonize subsectors within the transport sector. But in principle, it's more and more clear that electrification can take care of a big percentage of the transport sector demand. In the case of cities, well, better urban planning, and I wonder the extent to which you are discussing this, because your project, DISTENDER, is very trying to go to the co-creation of scenarios, and then the hope is that all of these propositions will be of interest to your discussion. So there is a lot of better urban planning in cities, sustainable production and consumption of goods and services, electrification again of everything in cities. In the case of buildings, there is so much that can happen with buildings, but requires, of course, investments, ambitious policy packages, and retrofits. Industries might provide some of the hard to decarbonize sectors as well, but there is a lot that can happen especially with heat, using electricity in some of the cases for a cheap renewable produced electricity for some of the cases, the industrial sectors that produce heat, for instance, that work with heat. But it's recognized in the report that achieving net zero in the industrial sector is a challenging task. The report is a good, very good and nice report, chapter number 4 on the demand and services, how to manage demand. And this will be one that you should be paying close attention if you are doing co-production of scenarios and in the DISTENDER project, because it details a bit in lifestyle changes and systemic changes that are necessary. And then it says, it claims that managing demand can bring down global emissions in the range of 40 to 70%. But there's a lot of work to do that. It's a beginning that we are now focusing on demand. And as I said before, with the scenarios and the removal of carbon is seen as it's a counterbalance to hard to eliminate emissions. They especially consider that it will not be sufficient to decarbonize everything. There is still some remaining emissions that will need to be removed. And then in this case, there's a big effort and push for carbon dioxide removal technologies and business models, etc. So this is booming at the moment. The case of biodiversity, it's not been directly tackled in in the report, but is something that is emerging now as a cross-disciplinary effort that needs to be followed in the common reports. And I could see that in the center, biodiversity is not as yet mentioned. I could see air pollution and other areas of interplay, but biodiversity is still not. It's to be in the future. There are some potential improvements in opportunities for mitigation if we consider biodiversity, and restoration of natural ecosystems might be one of them. But this demands between biodiversity and climate mitigation need to be well managed. So a lot of policies and regulatory and economic instruments were assessed as well, and it's part of where the policy packages. This needs to be brought in tandem, all in policy packages, cannot be just individual efforts. And what we're seeing now after COP is a number of announcements of partnerships happening between a kind of group of countries and specific developing countries. In the case of Vietnam and South Africa, there has been a new partnership for just transition that is implemented. So my last point is trying to say that the urgency of acting is more than justified, but we need to be attending to the trade-offs, the synergies and justice issues, and understanding that if we're going to go from a unsustainable path into a more sustainable path, there will be some disruption, and the disruption of incumbents is something that is that can have a high social cost. So we don't know so much about what is happening here in the middle. We have a lot of ideas that we should go from towards sustainability and enabling and implementing issues, but we are working much less with this, how what is unsustainable becomes part of the this transition as well. So within that, there's a number of theoretical approaches, but the idea that we will have to look at these things in combination, and a number of policy packages need to be understood, implemented at the same time, and tested is part of the managing complexities that we need to, that is emphasized as well in the report. One last piece of it is the justice approach, and then each region, country, locality, business person can act to reduce emission, but we need to be aware of the carbon footprint. It's vast different from if you consider incomes, and there should be, of course, a number of actions related to tackling what happens within high socioeconomic status, and a revision of whether this is what we want to support with the remaining carbon budgets, since high level income disproportionately affects have large carbon footprints, and can really fence themselves from the climate change. In conclusion, mitigation is key. Acting to reduce emissions across sectors and across society matters a lot, and we need to be aware of what radical change means. And again, I urge the dissenter groups working with the co-production of scenarios and futures to really deeply think what we're wishing to do on half for the future. And this is all I have to share with you today. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your presentation, Maria. So, first of all, I have to apologize. I noticed a mistake in my agenda. There was a 30 minutes gap. So we have covered exactly the time. So we can do the round table at the end a little bit longer, or we can finish a few minutes before.
We'll take a break sometime, or we listen to 2 hours of presentation.
Well, I mean, because the IPCC members are here, I think it's better to continue, and then because it's just one presentation more and the round table. In the round table, we can. Okay.
Can be good though to have like 5 minutes
Okay. We can
We won't take
have
much time.
5-10 minutes. 10 minutes 10 minutes break. Okay. Okay.
Microphone is open.
Was open. So we are going to continue with our session. So the next presentation is done for Marcelo and Lucia. They are part of the Work Package 11. Marcelo is the leader of the Work Package 11, and we will talk about networking in this tender project.
Okay. Thank you very much, Roberto, for the brief introduction. I'm Marcelo Ballini from IPCC. I'm leading communication, dissemination, exploitation activities within DISTENDER, being representative of Work Package 11 activities. We heard about a very interesting presentation. Thanks to the experts of IPCC. You filled us with lots of information that I'm sure that our technical partners will come back to in the next section. And really, our duty here is to kind of build a bridge between what DISTENDER does, what we get and we will get from the IPCC, as well as to cast light on the future of the outcomes that we will generate as a project. And actually, the networking is one of the duty within our work package. And the way we do approach networking is by establishing connections with other projects, entities, and initiatives tackling our very same challenges. And that's what my colleague from Steinbeiß, Lucia, will tell you about. And last but not least, we want to build a bridge with the next section. So she's going to cast a couple of questions that will smoothen the transition to the next section. Having said that, hand it over to you, Lucia.
So good morning also from my side. My name is Lucia Rana from Steinbeiß. And so together with Marcelo, we're working on the networks engagement in the DISTENDER project. So the aim is to broaden the network of the individual members of the project, and so with actions to identify, contact, and establish lasting relationships over time that also expand the period of the DISTENDER project. And the aim is to identify and collaborate with networks on national and international level, but also at local level, so at the level of the case studies of the project. And also we have a specific interest in collaborating with the sister projects of the DISTENDER. So what we have done until now, and well, actually what is the idea for the project is, first of all, to work where we want to engage with 30 networks approximately, and we do this with different means. So with classic communication dissemination measures, engaging with public webinars, with also clustering events where we bring together different projects who work in neighboring fields, also with social media engagement and newsletters. And in the end of the project, it will be focusing on replicating the DISTENDER solution and making this widely available. So for this, we first of all would like to work with the network of DISTENDER, and we have a large collection actually of individual networks that can be that will actually reach out to, and so this is, for instance, the Climate Change Coalition. It is EIT, Climate Kick, Metropolis, so different kinds of networks that are already existing, and then we'll reach out. So the next layer is then to include the sister projects, Knowing and Nevermore, which are funded within the same called topic of this tender. And then the next level is also to see, well, which other project is there of ongoing Horizon 2020 projects in this field, or also projects linking to disaster resilient societies. And to bridge the gap now to this interactive part, we have prepared 2 questions. So which link the networking activities also, or try to link it with our guests today. So it was already mentioned today in the beginning by Jan Gunnar that the IPCC is not doing new research, but actually consolidating what is already out there. And so I think that is a great point to start. So, well, what is the challenges? And that would be interesting, I think, maybe not just for us, but also for other like audience who's listening online. What is the challenges in really breaking down the existing climate change research that is out there and making it available for policymakers, so that policymakers have research-based information that they can take as a source for their decision making. So that would be one question which we would like to point out to you. And the second one is then, what role is the IPCC playing, or can the IPCC play in bridging also the knowledge gaps between all these different networks that are out there, and yeah, in relation to climate change, adaptation, and mitigation. So I suggest I'll just open up the floor to you, and you can yeah, respond to any of these questions in the preferred order. Well, we still need to see the questions.
So if we are doing something like a bridge with a round table now, something like that.
Exactly. Mm-hmm.
So, in fact, as Lucia mentioned, this is opening the actual roundtable according to the agenda. So now we can ask questions. We are free to ask any question in this discussion. And as Lucia mentioned, you can start with the points that she showed in the screen, which are very important points. So I'm not sure if Jan or Piero or Maria would like to comment something on this. If you hear me.
Yes, can you hear me? It's Jan Gunnar here.
We hear you, yes.
Yeah, thank you again for this very interesting presentations and conversations. And I just make a very short introductory statement that I think, and it's partly connected also to the 2 questions on the screen, it's no doubt in my mind, at least, that IPCC has played a very, very important role in bridging between different sectors and different institutions, and bringing forward a message that is without any doubt to politicians. We also have seen that the Nature Panel has been established. There is now an international discussion about potentially an ocean panel inspired by the IPCC. So I don't think it's the lack of results and quality and documentations evidence in the IPCC reports that is the key here and the Achilles heel. It's actually the will to collectively take action on things that are well known by politicians around the world. I can only speak for the politicians I get in touch with, but I don't think they lack understanding. It's more a lack of what is possible to do within their political landscape and space. and also the lack, I think, globally from some of the actors to actually push hard enough. So I would say IPCC is playing its role, important role, and leaving the message and the documentation to others that are in charge, politicians in particular, that we don't see the speed and power of the actions needed that we wanted to see. Thank you.
Thank you, Jan. I would like to underline 2 points closely related what you see in the screen. One of them is this tender is focusing on local areas, which is more difficult. I mean, the smaller the area, the smaller the policy maker, in the sense that they have a small municipality or small region, the more difficult is for these people to introduce this adaptation and mitigation strategies. So this is one of the key points, and I'm not sure if you would like. I mean, when I say you, of course, this is a public session. We have here people who is not in this tender. They are participating in the conference. They can ask a question also anytime. But I was thinking about your reaction about when you show these global maps. Very, very interesting, of course. This is the base of the global climate change. But when we go to the local level and very local level, things are becoming much more complicated, because in many cases, yes, they notice the climate change, temperature are higher, etc., but they don't have a policy how to do it, because they don't have the means, the capabilities to adapt it. And this is one of the areas that this tender is producing information in very nice way, according to the call, of course. And the other one is the trade-off effects of the different strategies, electric cars, etc., etc. There are many strategies. I think in the European Commission, I saw an Excel file with more than 4,000 strategies since 2018 to 22. So in these 4 or 5 years, there are about 4,000 strategies, just mentioning this link. However, some of these strategies, they have secondary effects, trade-off effects, not very, let's say, disadvantages. And this is one of the main reasons why this call was open. And then the 3 projects, I mean, Novi is the name of the other sister project. We have a workshop in this conference also on Friday after lunch. And also Nevermore is another project. So we have 3 projects, and then we are focusing a little bit on this trade-off. For us, the trade-off and the integration of adaptation and mitigation strategies is just the key objective of our project. And then in the presentations we show you, of course, in the first 12 months, this is limited to the initial starting of the project. But now in the next 12 months, we will go to the heart of the processes. And hopefully next year we will have much more interaction about, and we will be able to show you also some more details about these results of modeling and results of the risk and vulnerability effects, etc., what we heard today. So these 2 points for me, I really would like that you 3, Maria, Piero, and Jan, can comment about that, about the local effects and the trade-off effects. Is it possible, please?
You are muted, Piero. You are muted.
I was muted. Fantastic. He was. Piero. Sorry. But you can speak. One of you. Piero, we don't hear you. We don't hear you. Piero.
Can you hear me? Maybe I cannot speak then. Okay. Well, Piero, sorry.
Okay, Maria.
No, well, briefly, I think it's, I'm very impressed by this tender goals and aims and this way of trying to bring the bottom up into the bigger scenario thinking, and the scenario thinking at the global level down into that can be understood at the impacts at the local level. This is not happening at the IPCC level, and it cannot be, because of course it's the aim is global. But I think it's a very valuable input to the discussion. And I think for the next processes for the IPCC, we have to consider these levels of interaction between impact and the global and the local. That's first. And I forgot the second one, so I'm going to let Piero take on. But I think I just say that these are the kind of efforts that needs to be happening, and it will not be possible, even though politicians are not taking the decisions at the global level, and there is a lot of difficulty to get countries, big pronouncements at the larger scale. I don't see any limitation for the small scale to gain understanding, for things to happen, for networks to operate. And I think if the DISTENDER projects like this can contribute to this, there is advancement, and everything counts. I think we need to advance in every level. For now, for me.
Okay.
I just try to disconnect. I connect it again. Does it work now?
Yes, it works.
Okay, sorry. Apparently,
No problem.
I was not muted according to my screen, but clearly you couldn't hear me. So I missed part of what Maria said. Apologies, Maria. But I think the knowledge in general, scientific knowledge, is available. It's not complete. It's not always complete, but it is available and it is usable. Then the point it is that, of course, to use, you need scientific knowledge in general. You need scientific skill, technological skills. You need a specific expertise, which is generally not, or at least not required for politicians. This is not to diminish the role of politicians, but it is a different role. The role is not to implement technical solution, but to decide eventually which technical solution should be implemented. Now, those I don't have a view about other countries, but for instance, in Italy, when you go at the very local level, generally, simply the administration are not equipped with sufficient workforce to afford that sort of work. Then the other point it is whether politicians are really motivated or considering seriously or a major issue contrasting climate change or adapting to climate change. But that is that's really very often it is a political issue, and I think information is very clear. So it's not a point of lacking information. It is also very widely disseminated. I was involved in a huge number of dissemination activities in Italy. So actually, if you look at media now, it even the opposite tendency that whatever natural disaster occurs, climate change is blamed for that, which is generally often in several cases just an excuse for bad planning, for contrasting present risks, not change or increased risk determined by climate change. Considering the role of IPCC, so I think on the side of IPCC, it is difficult to do more than what it has been done so far. And also for many scientists, this is difficult to do more than what we have done. It is not, I think, an excuse, but the point is that motivations of citizens, culture of citizens, decisions and political decisions. The second question, I'm not sure I got it properly, but I try to be very strict on the role of IPCC. The role of IPCC is to assess scientific knowledge and to communicate it in a way that is usable for politicians. So I'm not sure I understand properly the second question, but that sort of bridging, I'm not sure it is within the task, the mandate of IPCC. IPCC is assessing knowledge and making it available to policymakers, citizens, and stakeholders that are not necessarily specialists. And I think this is what we are asked to do, not to go farther beyond that mandate.
Comment, Piero, to clarify my second point. Well, I was mentioning that in the different strategies that the municipalities and regions have been carrying out in the last, let's say, 4 or 5 years in Europe, there are advantages and disadvantages. For instance, an example, because I was living 2 years in Norway, so I have one example from, I was living in Bergen, and even many years ago, before I was in the Max Planck Institute with Hauselmann, the initial global models in the 90s, but in Norway, the people say, okay, we have a climate change, we will have a higher temperature, so we will be able to have some wine harvests in the south, but that requires some fertilization processes, but fertilizers are very bad emitters, in terms of ammonia, and also from the economic point of view, the largest fertilizer producer is Russia. Just with these 3 points, I mean, when you analyze the impact of a strategy, in order to take advantage about that, when you go to local level, then we have these advantages and disadvantages. I call it trade-off effects. So this is just the point I wanted to put on the table to discuss. This is really what I wanted to know your reaction about this, because this is exactly one of the 2 objectives in the project. Because at the end, we are going to create, this is our objective, a simple methodology to go all the downscaling process from country level to city level. When I say city, small villages, all the way, with all the things. So we have to, let's say to the policymakers that when they contract the companies with these strategies, they have to take, to get feedbacks from the advantages and disadvantages. And then if you have different strategies, they should not have fighting each other. And then the advantages can be, to be not to be so benefit because we have disadvantages of the other. All these things. That's why our project is called integrated adaptation and mitigation. So this is just what I put on the floor in order you to comment or discuss. But yeah, I think it was clear your reaction. If you want to add something, or Jan or other one.
Yeah, let me briefly try to reflect on both these issues. From what I see, my position, I think we have a global process, many of course, but IPCC and conversation and also ambitions that is, it's not perfect, but it's working fairly well. And also it's then taken down on the national level with national ambitions, national plans for how to combat climate change. And if that is reached or not, I don't necessarily are too optimistic on behalf of many nations, including my own. But the weakest point, I think you point to, that's from the capitals to the municipalities. From what I see, there is really a spot there and a loose bridging between national strategies, national plans, and what is actually going on in the municipalities due to lack of knowledge, lack of capacity. But I also see a trend that things are rippling down, at least in Norway. There are some municipalities now that have planned for climate adaptation, even climate risk, so a broader perspective. But it's slow, and it's too slow in relation to the speed we actually need. So to the trade-offs, if I understood you correctly, I live in a part of the world where we most likely have a net positive sum of climate change consequences, which is a paradox, of course, on a planet where we have a huge challenge ahead of us. Having said that, I think at least stakeholders, for sure politicians, are well aware of that. Even if we, in a way, isolated the framing around Norway and northern Norway, where I live, and we would have an isolated benefit from more biomass production. It could be wine, it could be in the ocean, it could be many things that we are having as benefits. That would not be a perspective that we can take. And there was a national risk committee that went through all the climate risks on behalf of Norway some years ago. And one of their conclusions were that the highest climate risk that Norway poses is climate change outside our borders, outside Norway. So I'm not, you can find individuals that say, I can have a longer summer, a warmer summer, I can swim and I can sunbath and all this. But I think when you come to stakeholder level, people understand that there is a challenge, although in isolation you can find benefits, at least in my region. And for Europe, and Piero showed it excellently and depressively, what Europe is standing up against, and of course not to speak about Africa and also Asia and South America. So I'm not so pessimistic that people are distracted by advantages, actually, although they exist to some extent. Thank you.
Thank you. We have a question from the room. Carl Schneider, University of Cologne, please.
I should come up so that you can see who is asking. I think you made it very clear that time is running out. We need very decisive action, quickly. But to make that action, which takes place on local places, I think we need to learn from each other. And here are my two questions. What experience do you have in assessing these local actions from the IPCC? And could you see a vision to say, well, maybe down the road, we develop a catalog of good practice or best practice examples, just have a template to facilitate this learning from each other, because I think we need to learn very quickly. And putting this on the table in a structured form, and IPCC is extremely visible in that area, might be a path in the future. Thank you.
If I can react quickly to this question, there are some limitations to IPCC naming directly places, and even though there are some interactions and boxes, particularly within the report, that highlights cases specifics. But for instance, countries should not be highlighted within the IPCC report, and there are some limitations because everything that the reports are normally have more room to produce all of this, but the synthesis report that is what finally gets in the hands of policymakers, the 30 pages report, that is negotiated and word by word, accepted by the plenary of 189 countries. So normally nobody wants to see themselves reflected badly there. So there is some limitation for what the IPCC can do in terms of naming cases, and if somebody's looking too good, then it will not go well as well to be highlighted so much, because nobody wants to be, for good or bad, pointed at. So there is the regional level, there is a sectoral level, and it's easier to discuss technologies and technological approaches than to discuss what happens at the level of countries, regions, and cases, specific cases. So that's the limitation the IPCC has. I don't know if that will change moving forward, but so far it's been like this. Thank you.
I would like to reinforce just what Jan Gunnar said. I mean, I think I can say it better than how he said, but it's clear that locally or at the sub-regional level, climate change can create opportunities and advantages. And you can see some immediate advantages in some region, but at the same time, it is exactly as Jan Gunnar said, then also what happens outside of your region matters. You are in a very globally connected world. So yes, you have a local gain, but how many things do we get from outside in general in our very interconnected trading and economies? So if it is not properly managed, even the local gain can be contrasted and surpassed by an overall loss. So I think adaptation clearly needs to be implemented at local or regional level. That's the level of adaptation very often. But also coordination at national and international and global level of adaptation is important.
A comment again from Carl Schneider.
Yeah, rather quickly, I fully understand that this was beyond the scope of IPCC, and that is a dangerous part of the political agenda. I was looking for something like a warehouse, wherever this platform originates, to quickly learn from good experience. I am not knowledgeable of this warehouse. I know communities talk to each other. I do not really, I would say in Europe, countries might talk to each other if they have, let's say, a list of best practice approaches. And this is always only the good things, not the, otherwise it would not be a best practice approach. That might be helpful to not reinvent the wheel, but just to copy things that have worked.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks for coming from Jan.
Please.
Yeah, just on this topic of local actions, I would also then bring in the private sector. As I see it, the private sector is leading the politicians in many places, and they are trying to get greener and go through a transition. And I think a catalog of best practices is a very useful tool. We worked with the ocean industries at my center, and we have asked the many, the smaller one, the bigger one within all sectors, and many of them expressed the wish to have a code of conduct that is sometimes a guidance to them in their daily work on being sustainable and combating climate change that goes beyond the law and regulation. So I think there is a will out there among very many of the smaller ones, you may say, in the local communities and in the regional setting. And if you combine that into a kind of a catalog, that seems to be an attractive idea. So that's my immediate response. Thank you.
Thank you. Any reaction from the room? We are a lot of people. Any comment? Yes, the floor is yours, please.
No, I just wanted to say that following with the business approach, I work with at Copenhagen Business School in Denmark, and we work with businesses all the time, and a lot of corporate social responsibility and code of conduct in terms of sustainability. And this has been implemented for many, many years. And nowadays what we see is a lot of businesses taking net zero targets and committing to net zero targets, but with very little understanding of what that means and how they're going to reach there. So, and then, of course, that should feed back to the institutions to see how are we forming the professionals that are going to help these industries to understand what they need to do. And even the university is not shaping up itself in a good way to just be the ones leading the companies into understanding what it is. So at the moment, so having targets is important, but and for businesses committing, and still we seem to be at the level where there is a lot of nodding and saying yes, 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 we're going to have this target, and 2050 seems to be far away enough just to say yes, we're committing to net zero targets by 2050, but very little action, just translated into action. Therefore, it's important to have to work with the bottom up, and what is it that, what is your value chain? If it's a business, what is your city level, local, impacts that you need to work on, and how can you engage people more directly? I see a lot of value in this co-creation and efforts like the one this center is trying to advance. Thank you.
Thank you, Maria. Okay, there is another point, if there's no question, another point I would like to put on the table. In our project, because of the complexity of the relations between the policymakers, social science scientists, modelers, we have at the end of the project, we didn't show now because they have not already started to work officially in the first 12 months. We have a decision support system. It's led by a company in Gdańsk in Poland, and they will put, let's say, all these inputs, which are very complex, with different expertise areas. Let's say they put it all together in this decision support system, which is based in a multi-criteria analysis. It's a mathematical approach, not an artificial intelligence. We will use the artificial intelligence, but we will not develop artificial intelligence. I'm mentioning this because the Commission at the starting of the project, they came to me, no, you are not going to develop any artificial intelligence. They were somehow precluding something about this problem. No, we are going to use it, but our decision support system is only focusing on multi-criteria analysis. So they make some kind of prioritization of the different roles strategies that we will have at the end of the project. This will be at the end of 24, the beginning of 25. I would like to see how is your reaction, because this is, of course, the proposal. It was approved already. We have a partner here, even the partners here now in the room. If he can make any comment, or if you want to make any comment. I just wondering about this.
Well, we need to see the decision support system first before we can comment. No, but I think it's a great idea. The decision support system, and it's going to be leading some politicians or communities. So at what level would this decision support system be helpful?
Decision support system also will take the inputs of the policymakers, of course, so they can play with it and get different answers. But they also will charge all the information coming from the project, from these different areas. So, Andrew, I'm not sure if you want to mention something or you want to comment something about that.
At the moment,
Yeah, okay. At the moment, yes, he's with you. We have to see the decision support system, how it's finally developed. I don't know if you have a comment on that.
I have a shallow comment also because it is not my field actually, decision making. But I have some experience from another European project I was involved with. I personally, but that's my personal attitude, I am very skeptical on combining multi-criteria in a single score, if it is that what you mean. It is then you lose all the you eventually have a nice ranking with different options, but then you lose completely the information that has produced that ranking. And generally, multi-criteria are different criteria because they can't be comparable actually. Because, for instance, you can't compare an economic loss with a cultural loss sometimes. So, of course, you can translate a cultural loss in money, but still it is a translation. So I think it is important for me, but again, I say I'm not in decision making. Then the multi-criteria approach maintains the information on the path that has led to the final ranking. So that eventually the different way, the different options, different way that very often can't be translated in a simple number, could be maintained in the decision process.
Yeah, you are right. I mean, the idea we have, of course, we will develop it later, but the idea is the decision support system will see a tool, easy to use for the policymakers, very important, to integrate all of these complex processes with different expertise areas. And of course, the policymakers will take decisions in the input of the decision support system. And eventually they will have different outputs depending on the decision. So they have an active role in the final stage of the project, because policy is here, policy is in every place, particularly of these villages, regions, and country level, of course, because the methodology is trying to cover all the scales. Everybody will be involved, but mainly the policymakers at the end. Of course, the system, but from the mathematical point of view, they will keep the results, the scientific results, of course, untouched somehow.
My point is that policymaker should keep their responsibility. Very often they would like to be put in the position of science tell me to do something, which is a wrong point of view, because science can't provide directly, can't force a political decision. We have seen also in many different examples with the recent COVID pandemics. The point of view of science, abstract words, that should always be replaced with scientists, in any case, according to me, because in some sense, science is very abstract and it is not a completely clear concept to me sometimes. Science tells me to do this. Eventually, scientists or group of scientists can suggest solutions, can suggest actions, but in any way, at the end of the day, policymakers, parties, politicians, governments, that's their responsibility is the decision, not of science.
I fully agree with you. Okay, any additional reaction? We are close to the time to close the session. Any comments? Any questions? Bargaining questions? Okay, so Maria, yes.
I have a I don't know, counterfactual here, because we seem to be, I mean, the DISTENDER projects at large is heavily data-based as well, right? So there is something you want to do something with that data. You're trying from the global to the local and trying to localize these options and then give it to policymakers as kind of digest complex information that comes from the local. But I want to remind you that at least mitigation, I know adaptation requires a lot of funding, but in the case of mitigation, there is a lot that can happen that needs not be directed by technology or a lot of data before the decision can be taken. And if you are working with the bottom up and co-creation and all of that, I think the DISTENDER should be not only ending in a multi-criteria assessment that is going to guide policymakers, but also give the alternative that there are many things that can contribute to change the demand, to reduce the demand of fossil fuels and reduce emissions in society, and are not really only technology based or demand a lot of thinking or a lot of data to conclude. So if you are also nurturing that part of it within this center, then I would like to see that this, I would like to encourage you to bring a balance to that and then use those two as part of your inputs to policymakers and what action needs to be based on. Thank you.
Much again for your comments. So I don't see any further question from anyone in the room. So again, thank you very much for staying with us. We will be in contact for the next meeting, in principle next year, but probably we will change some schedule and we will share with you all the details about the project, if we change some procedures, but in principle, in the next year, I don't know where we will have the meeting, we will invite you again, in principle, okay? Thank you very much.
Thank
and
you.
thank you all the people here physically.
Thank you.
In the room.
Bye. Good luck with the work.
Thank you
Thank
very
you.
much. Thank you.
Bye.
So
No, thank you very much.
we
Good luck.
close now officially, not yesterday, the DISTENDER annual meeting. So have a nice trip back. And those of you who will stay all the day or more days, I think a few persons will stay more days, have a nice stay here in Madrid. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.